Hi, I'm Brian Nash from How We Got Here Genealogy. Knowing the stories of our families and how they got here is important. It helps give you an understanding of your place in the world and your history. It also helps put your life and family into a historical perspective. Growing up, I always loved history. Uh, I wound up studying history in university, though it's not where my career wound up taking me. But it's always been a love of mine, which is one of the reasons why I have this YouTube channel and I have a podcast where I discuss local history and family history. And one of the best ways I find of understanding history is to make it personal. In this video, I'm going to share a very personal story of a long time friend of mine that um, was originally part of my podcast from January 5th, 2021, uh, where he tells the story of his family and how they arrived from Scotland during the Scotland clearances, how they wound up in Pictou County, Nova Scotia, and a little bit about the meaning and the impact that has had in his life since. So join me in this journey, my friend, my good friend, Jamie Baillie. Um, so I just want to welcome to the podcast an old friend of mine, Jamie Baillie, and he's going to talk a little bit about his family history and how they arrived in Nova Scotia and sort of some of the events that led to their coming. But as I like to do with everybody I talk to, before we get into the meat of it, I'd like to just give you a chance, Jamie, just to introduce yourself and just um, tell us a little bit about how you started pursuing genealogy and what were what were you hoping to accomplish when you first started?
Well, thank you very much for asking me to do this. It's going to be fun to talk about my family and its background, something I didn't know about really until just a few years ago. I'm 54 years old. I'm a former CEO of Credit Union Atlantic, based in Halifax. I also spent some time in politics as leader of the PC party and leader of the official opposition, ran two elections as leader of the opposition, came within 230 votes out of 550,000 cast of being elected the premier, which is a close call. Uh, and it was a heck of a ride. And now I'm back in the private sector and doing some consulting. All of that while raising a family with my wife, Sandra. We have two beautiful daughters, Alex and Hannah, aged 22 and 20. That's the current Baileys. You asked me how I got interested in this, and really, uh, in a sad way, I got interested in it. My dad passed away a few years ago, and I realized I didn't know a lot about the Baillie family story. But I did remember one thing. I remembered that when I was 12 years old, my father and my great uncle Bert Baillie from Salt Springs, Nova Scotia, took me into the backwoods of Pictou County, off the highway, down a secondary road, down a dirt road, down a logging trail, get out of the car, hike through the woods to the spot where the original Baillie family graveyard is here in Nova Scotia. And I clearly remember my father saying, "I want you to remember this spot, boy, because someday you'll be the only one that will be able to find it, and it'd be your job to keep this place up. So I made it my mission to find that graveyard again, with great thanks to the Thomas McCulloch Center in Pictou, by the way, which has the exact GPS coordinates of every known graveyard in Pictou County, which is how I started. And then thanks to these wonderful iPhones, which now have GPS tracking down to the thousandths of a degree, I was able to track through the woods and find that gravesite. And I was amazed at how many James Baillies, which is my name, and Robert Baillies, which is my father's name, there were going back 6 generations to the oldest, which was Robert Baillie, who emigrated from Scotland to Pictou in 1814, along with 5 children and his wife. That fascinated me, and I wanted to know more about it, which got me on a search through the genealogy records here in Nova Scotia, and to the conclusion that the Baillies were in fact part of the renowned Highland Clearances in the early 1800s. So that, of course, got me very interested in why they would have left Scotland. My dad used to tell me that all he knew was that the Baillies got kicked out of Scotland and something to do with sheep. I didn't know what that was, but I now understand what he was trying to tell me. And it's been a great journey ever since.
So, so the Highland clearances at 1814, that would be pretty much still near the beginning of sort of where the clearances became kind of a more drastic measure than they had originally been, into the 1770s, 1780s, sort of the height of some of the clearances, where some of the things that had been rare occurrences of the forceful evictions now started to become.
Yeah, well, actually, it's interesting. 1814 is known as the year of the burning, because so many crofters, which is what the Baillies were, which are tenement farmers, had their black houses or their homes destroyed and then burned to the ground so they couldn't come back. And that's why in 1814, Robert Baillie and his family got on a ship and crossed the Atlantic to the New World and ended up in Pictou. It's actually quite an amazing story when you think about it, because he was 54 years old at the time, which is actually my exact age today. I can't imagine picking up everything and moving to a new part of the world at 54 here in 2020, but in 1814, you were an old man at 54. And he had 5 kids, mostly teenagers at that time, and a wife which was quite a bit younger than he was. And they were renovicted, to use 2020 Halifax term. Their landlord, the Duke and Duchess of Sutherland, decided that they could make their properties more profitable by getting rid of all these crofter farmers who, in many cases, including the Baillie case, had been there for multiple generations. Getting rid of them, evicting them, and then replacing them with sheep farms, because wool was very pricey in those days, and sheep farms were more profitable than people were. You can almost imagine them doing the 1814 equivalent of a spreadsheet and calculating their profit margin would be higher with sheep. So I happen to know that the lease for the Baillie property was sold to a sheep farmer at the Golspie Inn in Golspie, Scotland, which is in the Highlands in Sutherlandshire, on December 15th, 1813. And they were evicted. And the rules at the time were that you were allowed to do one more growing season after you got your notice of eviction, sell off whatever cattle you had, complete one more round of crops, probably potatoes and turnips and that kind of thing, and then out you go. So in the spring of 1814, they would have had a notice of eviction nailed to the front door of their black house, and they would have been given so many weeks to vacate. And then when the time came, a representative of the Sutherland estate, which based on their location would almost certainly have been a man named Patrick Seller. I don't know if you've come across that name,
Yep.
but he actually stood trial for murder for the way he conducted these evictions, not in the Baillie case, but in a nearby township. When he arrived to evict a Scottish farming family, there was a 93-year-old woman in the house, and he said, get her out, and she refused to leave, so he burnt the house to the ground anyway, and she was killed. He was charged with culpable homicide, as it was known at the time. Same person almost certainly would have been in charge of the evictions in Strathbrora, in the township of Scottery, which is where the Baillies were. So they gathered up whatever meager belongings they had, and they got on a timber ship called the Perseverance of Aberdeen and set sail for Pictou, Nova Scotia in the summer of 1814. And that's how the Baillies got here to this day. Now, I don't know if your listeners want this much detail, but I can tell you that they were met at the dock in Pictou by a lawyer named Hugh Denoon. Actually, first, I should correct that. First, they were met by a Presbyterian minister named the Reverend Norman MacLeod.
Yep.
And his job at the dockside in Pictou was to greet the incoming ships and separate the Catholics from the Protestants. And if you were Protestant, or in this case, Scottish Presbyterian, they would land you in Pictou. If you were Catholic, they made you stay on the ship and you had to sail further up the coast to Antigonish or into Cape Breton, which is funny because that's over 200 years ago. And the settlement pattern of Nova Scotia is still very clearly predominantly Presbyterian in Pictou County and predominantly Catholic in Antigonish and in many parts of the Highlands of Cape Breton, all based on the Reverend Norman MacLeod meeting these ships and separating them by religion.
And that would be the Norman MacLeod who wound up eventually, I think, in the Gold Coast of Australia.
That's right. He was quite a world traveler.
He was.
You are in PEI, so you would remember the Lord Selkirk ferry that used to cross from Pictou to Wood Islands. Well, Lord Selkirk made a fortune in Scotland by selling passage on these timber ships to the New World. And his brilliant business insight was all these ships sail to Nova Scotia empty, load up with timber, and then sail back to Scotland. He figured, why not sell passage on the way over to Nova Scotia on these empty ships from all these displaced settlers? And so that's how the Baillies ended up getting on one of these ships. They were met at the dockside by Lord Selkirk's agent in Pictou, a lawyer named Hugh Denoon. And his job was to petition the lieutenant governor on your behalf to get you a grant of land. And this was a big deal because these were farmers who never owned the land that they tilled. That crofters or tenement farmers, very, very poor, would pay their rent annually to a representative of the Duke and Duchess of Sutherland. Sometimes they paid it in crops or in chickens. I don't know if you ever saw the show Outlander, but there's a great episode where Jamie Fraser, representing the Laird, goes out into the countryside and goes township to township collecting the rents. And these poor, downtrodden, dirty farmers would show up to pay their annual land rent in whatever goods they had. They'd line up. I remember watching one of those episodes with my oldest daughter saying, you see those really poor people in that lineup? That's the Baillies. That's us. That's the history before they were evicted on account of sheep. So Hugh Fraser met the Baillies in Pictou, and he wrote a letter, which I have a copy of, to the Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia at the time, a man named Sir John Cope Sherbrooke, who Sherbrooke, Nova Scotia is named after, and he granted them 150 acres of land up in the mountains of Salt Springs, Pictou County. And that's where the graveyard is that I went to visit all those years ago and have been to again since.
So, so that graveyard is hallowed ground, not just as
It is.
the area, just the family. Um, and can you described it now as wooded? Is it wooded and rocky? Is it wooded and like I'm just trying to imagine coming from Scotland and being given this land. You know what they actually what they faced, and I can imagine the
Well, first of all, they faced massive disappointment because they'd been sold waterfront fertile land in the mouth of Pictou Harbor, like everybody was. And what they found when they had trekked quite a distance inland up to the top of the mountains of Salt Springs, Mount Tom, is that there's no water in sight. It's pretty scraggly, and it's full of dense trees that needed to be cleared. It must have been an incredible amount of hard work to clear that land and to establish a homestead and actually, raise crops. But they did. They managed to do it at 54 years old.
and yeah, that's amazing. I'm just thinking of all the, the things, even the provenance of the name of the ship, the Perseverance of Aberdeen,
Yeah.
because that really is what it did. If you, I know the population of the Highlands in Scotland, even at the beginning of the clearances, it was still growing quite high, and but there was, yeah, shortly after the 18, well, around that period, it started to really drop, and
Mm-hmm.
that's where you have that big influx of the Highlanders into the Pictou and into Cape Breton and Antigonish area, definitely. Um, you know, and it's amazing. I don't really want to tell you that I'm related to a Selkirk. I don't think it's to the Lord Selkirk's family. uh, but
Yeah.
but yeah, definitely. So your family, you said was it your fifth great grandfather? Did you say was it?
Yes, that's right, by
Um,
my count.
and,
So for 4 generations,
mhm,
they farmed that site. And I will say, as much as they were disappointed when they arrived and saw that they weren't on a lush waterfront property, they made quite a go of it. Uh, and they were very thankful that they owned their own land for the first time ever in the family's history.
yeah.
And I believe the family became much more prosperous as the years and generations went on as farmers that owned their own land than they ever were back in the Highlands, where they were tenant farmers.
So
So,
eh,
yeah,
as drastic as the being forcefully evicted from your where you lived, probably your family for centuries,
yeah.
it wound up being a positive thing in the long term, though they might not have seen it necessarily at that point. So
Well,
what?
I believe that to be true. The Sutherland family. I mean, there's been a lot written about the Duchess of Sutherland, who was the
Yes.
direct descendant, or as we call her in our house, the evil Duchess of
Mhm.
Sutherland, uh, who married a very wealthy Englishman, and they were among the richest families in the United Kingdom at that time. But obviously trying to maximize their wealth, even at the expense of the local citizens. They didn't want to lose all of these workers on their property. They were going to move them into fishing villages on the coast and into the new coal mines that were being
Yeah.
developed in Scotland at the time. However, the government of the UK actually did want people to move to the New World because you think what was going on at that time, one of the things that was going on was the War of 1812.
Yeah.
And so the British government was very keen to grow the population of British North America to further establish their claim to the territory when we were being invaded by the U.S.
And actually, yeah, the end of the War of 1812, the Napoleonic Wars, is actually when
That's right.
a lot of the clearances you really intensified, just because at that point, when people were getting along a little more peacefully in Europe, a lot of the crofters whose land had been taken over from sheep, the prices of sheep,
Hmm.
the wool had just drastically, plummeted basically, and as they they sent these people out to North America and later to Australia and New Zealand, or at the same time, or you know, they. It's funny that a lot of these people that were the crofters that were originally moved for sheep and then moved and wound up going to these places, and a lot of them wound up being sheep farmers. And that's what I was going to ask you. So, what type of farming did they do? Do you know that they did here? And
Yeah,
um,
they were cash crop produce farmers. I believe they had a small supply of cattle and barn animals, but they were mostly produce farmers: potatoes, turnips, cabbage, that kind of thing. Uh, and then they would take their produce down to the town of Pictou and sell it there.
and so you found a lot of this information.
Hmm.
So how did you go about where? I know with me with and genealogy, generally you start it yourself and you move backwards,
Hmm.
and going to that graveyard was, just a find that a lot of genealogists would just literally die for, to
Yeah.
have that, to have that those generations listed
Yeah.
listed back, and very visible, and in one place, like you said, there was a lot of a few generations of Roberts and Jameses,
Yeah. That's
that
right.
then
Two
continued.
Henrys.
um, so when did you talked a little bit about knowing the time frame, like how did you go about getting this information? Like you said, the land grant, even getting that, what resources do you sort of have to rely upon? And
Yeah.
uh,
Well, I'll tell you, you're right about starting with yourself and going back. I kind of went from two angles. I started from myself and went back, and then because I had found that graveyard with the original settler, Robert Baillie of 1814, I just go from him and go forward and meet in the middle. One of the best sources is the Nova Scotia Archives website. They are awesome. If you can look up marriage certificates, birth certificates, death certificates for your parents and then their parents, and of course birth certificates. Well, all of them will name the parents of the
yeah,
person you're looking for, and you can go look up that person, find out the name of their parents, and look up that person and find the name of their parents. And I was able to go all the way back to Robert Baillie that way and prove that he was that I am a direct descendant of his. So I have no doubt this is not me just wishfully thinking
yeah,
that. I went from me to my father to his father to his father, and tracing all those key moments, government records, was able to draw a straight line from me to him, which was just very, very cool. That moment when it all came together is just incredible. But there are other resources as well, and I've got a few here. A Dictionary of Scottish Immigrants to Canada Before Confederation by Donald White has been a great book, and it lists thousands and thousands of immigrants. If you're interested in Pictou County, there's a book called After the Hector: The Scottish Pioneers of Nova Scotia and Cape Breton, 1773 to 1852, by Lucille Campy. Has a lot of great appendices that name the ships that came over and whether they have a passenger manifest or not. Another book is called Fast Sailing in Copper Bottomed Boats: Aberdeen Sailing Ships and the Immigrant Scots They Carried to Canada, 1774 to 1855, also by Lucille Campy. All of them had interesting information about the waves of Scottish immigrants that came to Canada in those years. Uh, and I will say, Ancestry.ca has been a great way to track it all.
when you so you're using Ancestry.ca to sort of compile your records. Do you have you when you went, you mentioned you also were able to find some information in Scotland as well.
Yes, that's right. So, in the middle of all this initial research, I got very interested in the Highland Clearances. So, I was Googling around looking for information, and it turned out a new book had just been published in Scotland at the source by the University of Glasgow Press. So I wrote away for it. I bought it online, and a few weeks later, this book arrived at my house here in Halifax. And the name of the book is Set Adrift Upon the World, The Sutherland Clearances by James Hunter. Now, I've never met this person. I didn't even know this book existed till I found a review of it on the internet. It arrived at my house from Scotland, and I'm reading through it. And by the way, if you are interested in what it was really like in the Highland clearances, this book is a number of firsthand accounts from the time and does a great job of creating the story, the historical record of what it was like. Uh, but I'm reading through the book, and I get to page 317 of the book, and all of a sudden, I find this passage which mentions Robert Baillie. I couldn't believe it. In fact, I've got it bookmarked here. I'll just share a little bit with you. It's talking about how important it was to become a landowner when you arrive in Nova Scotia from Scotland. And this one paragraph, something of what this meant to be a landowner emerges from a petition submitted to Nova Scotia's governor, Sir John Sherbrooke, by an early group of emigrants to Pictou from Sutherland. This group, comprising 17 people in all, consisted of 4 families. Those families were headed by Robert Baillie, Alexander Sutherland, Hugh McPherson, and Janet Sutherland, a widow, accompanied by her son and daughter. None of the 4 could write, and their petition, in effect an application for a land grant, was drawn up for them in October 1814 by a Pictou J.P. Hugh de Noon. That's my Robert Baillie. Now think of the odds. You get chills when you think about this. And then it goes on to quote from the petition. And I actually have a copy of the original petition where their lawyer, Hugh de Noon, says to the lieutenant governor, here are a family of farmers who were cast out of their homeland in favor of sheep and wish to make a new home here in Nova Scotia. And there's an X at the bottom, which would be my 5th great grandfather's X. That's chilling stuff, you know? I mean, this is just where it gets to be really fun to understand how we got here, as you like to say.
Yeah, it's no, it is. That's it. That is exciting to find that, you know, just yeah, the records, um, so with the birth records and stuff are always great, but have an actual another sort of an account of it
Mhm.
and somebody's perspective, probably within that great chapter of that book too, was probably uh, you know, getting a picture of everything that was going around, and then they actually mention your your ancestor there.
That's right.
It's a yeah, it's a quite an exciting thing. I would imagine I would have myself. I probably would have stopped right there and said, "Hey, kids, come listen to this."
Well,
Uh,
that's what I did. That's
yeah,
exactly what because I couldn't believe it. I needed to say it out loud because it just couldn't. It couldn't. My brain couldn't calculate how that was the same Robert Baillie, but it is.
um, so your your family when you and have you traced much back past him in Scotland?
I've done my best to do that. I can tell you it's on my to-do list to go over and do a more thorough job on the ground
Yeah.
in Sutherland Shire, Scotland. In fact, that was my 2020 travel plan until the pandemic hit. But I'm glad you asked that because I know it's quite a story from what I've been able to piece together here. Again, I had no idea about any of this until I got this bug. Uh, but I know exactly where their black house was uh, in the village of Scottery in the parish of Clyne in Loch Brora in Sutherland Shire, Scotland. Uh, and I can't wait to get there and zero in on that spot. I actually have corresponded with the president of the Clyne Historical Society which is in Golspie in the parish of Clyne. And he's excited to take me up to show me where it is, because he thinks he knows, and he knows Baillies that are still there, and so on, 200 and some years past. So that will be the case. I will do that as soon as travel allows us to do that again. But Brian, I can take you back till 1066 on the history of the Baillies. That might be more than you want to do in this one podcast, but the Baillies were actually Norman French and crossed the Channel with William the Conqueror in 1066. There is, with a little bit of research, you can find on the internet the list of families that crossed the Channel from Norman France with William the Conqueror, and the de Balliol family is one of them.
Okay.
And they were eventually sent to Scotland to help run the country as descendants, as this time goes on, of the original families with William the Conqueror. That was the glory days. That was the glory days. In fact, there was a John de Balliol who was King of Scotland in the 12th century. And he was actually deposed by Edward I, also known as Longshanks,
Yes.
which makes a starring appearance in the Braveheart movies. And if you listen really closely, there is a scene in Braveheart where William Wallace mentions the Balliol family,
okay,
which is who they were fighting to restore to the crown. So this is where I tell your listeners, this is where they're going to think I'm crazy. I may well be the legitimate King of Scotland today.
Or at least an heir.
Or at least an heir. The Balliols and the Bruces, like Robert the Bruce, had quite the rivalry going at the time. Those were the glory days. The Baillies fell on hard times, obviously, since then, going all the way down to Crofters up in Sutherlandshire, and then having to get on that boat and come over here. We're on the way up again a little bit now.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
taken 1,000 years.
Oh, that's the road that is our ancestors, especially going looking at anybody with relatives from the UK. There's quite a bit of that. I think we'd find a lot in common in the paths that our ancestors take and the ups and downs, especially as allegiances wound up changing quite a bit throughout the.
That's very true.
Yeah.
That's very true. So history is written about Robert the Bruce as a great Scottish king. Well, the Bruce family was all over the place, back and forth in their allegiances. The Baillies were consistent. That I know. In fact, mentioning the movie Braveheart, early in the movie, there's the scene where William Wallace murders the sheriff of the town, which is an English lord, because he had killed William Wallace's wife. Well, that actually happened. And that village is Lanark, or now Lanarkshire. And I know that because in real life, William Wallace did exactly that, but he also had a daughter who grew up and married a Baillie.
Okay.
And as a gift, William Wallace gave them the castle in Lanarkshire, where that English lord from the movie lived. And that is the seat of the Baillie clan to this day. I know you're not going to believe me. This is all true.
No,
The historical record. That is the seat of the Baillie clan to this day, where William Wallace's daughter married a Baillie.
Yeah.
Now, in the 1400s, the head of the Baillie clan was a William Baillie who had a daughter, Margaret, who was considered among the most beautiful women in all of Scotland. I mean, you can tell from looking at me that
definitely
run in the family. She was the most beautiful woman in all Scotland, and she married the first Duke of Sutherland and relocated from Lanarkshire to Sutherland. And there is this paper, they're not getting this just from simply Googling around. There is this history of the Baillies here. Here it is, History of the Baillies, Lives of the Baillies.
Okay.
I'm showing you this. I don't think your listeners can.
No.
It was written in 1872 by James William Baillie, and it goes all the way back to 1066. But he writes about this beautiful woman, Elizabeth Baillie, who married the first Duke of Sutherland and relocated to Sutherlandshire. But he also mentions, and I don't think I'm directly related to her, just to be clear,
Yeah.
because that was the rich end of the family. But it mentions in the book that certain persons from Lanarkshire of the name of Baillie went to Sutherlandshire with Margaret Baillie, the Countess of Sutherland. So that's us. In those days, it would have been all the farmers that lived outside the castle that supplied the castle. Well, some of them went with Margaret up to Sutherland, and I'm pretty sure that would be my wing of the Baillie family that followed her there and was there until 1814 when they came to Nova Scotia.
I just love genealogy and finding those little things, especially if you can find sort of those gateway ancestors that just can lead you back, because there's good documentation going back about certain families and members. Well, that's awesome. I really did enjoy the time here. So I just want to thank you, and on behalf of myself and my listeners, and I really appreciate this. And we'll have to chat again, Jamie, and we'll check up on this, especially if you get to Scotland. I'd love to hear your stories from
I'm going
over there.
once the world allows it, once we're all vaccinated and beat off COVID for good. Well, hopefully you'll go too. We'll go and
that's actually my plan is to sometime shortly. I've had very good luck. I find when you're dealing with people in some of those historical societies in Scotland, they're so generous with their time.
That's right.
And they definitely do. They want to share. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that time when I can go back and visit Scotland. And so, well, it's great talking to you.
Yeah, you too, Brian. Thank you so much for your interest in this, and I hope your listeners enjoy the story. I know I went on a little bit about some of the more colorful times, but
this is all about storytelling this here.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, good luck with this, and let's keep in touch.
Well, that was a great discussion with my friend Jamie Baillie about how the Scottish clearances, or Highland clearances, brought his family to Nova Scotia. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about the clearances, I'm going to link some videos here from my friend at Scottish History Tours, and right above here you're going to see some a link to the playlist for my other podcasts, and that include interviews with different people. Now, just remember, please take the time to subscribe, which you can do right up here. And until next time, keep safe, keep searching for your ancestors, and you have yourself a great day.